Google researcher Jennifer Wang co-wrote a paper called Gender Differences in Factors Influencing Pursuit of Computer Science and Related Fields. The paper focuses on a survey of 1,700 high school and college students and takes a statistical approach to understanding why women are not pursuing computer science. In our conversation, Jennifer talks about the two influences that lead to fewer women in computer science: encouragement and exposure. The problem of encouragement. Women often do not receive encouragement to go into computer science. The problem of exposure. Women are often unaware that computer science even exists. On this episode, we explore the roots of these problems and other results of her demographic study of young students. Thanks for listening to the episode today. If you enjoy it, if you enjoy any other episodes of Software Engineering Daily, please share it with your friends through Twitter or Facebook. Tell your friends about your favorite episode because word of mouth is how this show grows, and growth translates to continued episodes and growth for the show. So thanks for listening, and after a quick message from the sponsor, we will get on to today's episode. I had a crazy idea a couple weeks ago. It's a photo sharing app that only has pictures of cats. When I finish my photo sharing cat application, I will be deploying it to Linode because Linode is the fastest hosted Linux provider. I don't want to get locked into a proprietary platform that's going to overcharge me as soon as my app gets popular. I just want a fast Linux server with simple pricing. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. Plans start at $10 a month. So my free $20 will be plenty to launch my cat photo sharing app. Once I need to scale, I can use tools like node balancers and backups, and Linode has built-in dashboarding and metrics so that I can see the traffic to my Linode servers, and I can understand how many of my users are posting cat pictures and looking at each other's cat pictures. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. The plans start at $10 a month, so it's a great deal. Thanks to Linode for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Now let's get on to this episode. Jennifer Wang works at Google in computer science education outreach. Jennifer, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Today we are talking about the pursuit of computer science by women. So I will start with the question, why is the participation of women in computer science, why is that important for everyone?
That's a great question. So, I really view computer science as an important tool for everyone to know and to have because of a few things. So, one, it really provides you with a way of thinking and a way for you to grow as an individual so that you can problem solve. The second thing is that it's a tool to empower you too. You can do a lot more with computer science than you can do as a person alone, right? So you can be a lot more creative with the types of solutions that you're creating. And then just in today's world, I think the omnipresence of technology, technology being so integral to society that it's really becoming relevant and useful no matter what field you're in. You need to have some basic understanding of it, and it's really just a fundamental tool. So I think it's important for everyone to know and to learn computer science because of that. And in terms of women specifically, so it's well known that women are not well represented in the computer science field. There's a lack of diversity. But it's really important that the creators, the computer scientists and the engineers who are creating these technologies really represent the users so that we advance solutions and solve problems for everybody, not just the select group of people who are creating these things. And there have also been a lot of research studies looking at diversity on teams and diversity in creation. And diversity just leads to better and more innovative problem solving. So it's just really important to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to learn computer science and to contribute to the field itself.
How many women are pursuing computer science today at the high school and college level?
That's a great question. So I think the latest data from NCES says that it's about, at the university level, the portion of women earning computer science degrees is about 18% from 2014. And this actually dropped. So in the mid-'80s, 1984, the portion of women who were earning computer science degrees were actually 37% of computer science earners. And so that has actually dropped in the last several decades, whereas when you're looking at other STEM fields, the portion of women has increased steadily over the last decades. At the high school level, about 22% of AP computer science test takers were girls, and this is the latest data from 2015. And then at the college level, we see that the latest data from NCES says that the proportion of women earning bachelor's degrees in computer science is about 18%. And this has actually dropped from a peak in the mid-'80s, which was the proportion of women earning computer science degrees then was 37%, and it's actually dropped down to 18% in the last few years and has kind of hovered around there. And this is interesting compared to the other STEM fields where the proportion of women has actually increased steadily over the last several decades. So overall, the proportion of women learning computer science sits at about 20%, which is about 1/5 of those learning computer science are girls.
And that statistic that you cited that has dropped 50%. So in the mid-1980s, the proportion of women in computer science was 37%. Today, it is 18%. That is a staggering drop. Do you have any idea what has caused such a precipitous drop since the 1980s?
Yeah, we actually have not looked at that specifically. There are a lot of hypotheses on why that is. For instance, that was around the time that personal computers became prevalent. So at that time, it could have been, that computer games and like marketing really targeted boys more in that sense. So then boys were getting a lot more exposure to computers early on. That was also around the time that I think computer science really started growing as a field. And before that time, neither boys nor girls had much exposure to computers or computer science. But at that time, there was that difference in exposure. And university classes started doing things like having weeder courses. And so that decentivized women from taking those, especially if they didn't have that prior exposure. So there are a lot of hypotheses around there, but we haven't looked at that specifically in our own research.
So I get the sense that in more recent years, this topic of diversity in computer science, women in computer science, has really gained momentum in terms of importance. So is the trend reversing? Is the statistical trend for how involved women are in computer science, or how they are talking about computer science, how they are perceiving computer science, that precipitous drop from 37% to 18% in the last 30 years, is that being reversed?
Possibly. So we actually have a newer study that's a multi-year study. We've released a couple of reports last year, and this summer, we're going to release a few more reports with Gallup, where we're looking at participation in computer science across the U.S. at the K-12 level. And what we're seeing is over the last few years, I think there's this growth and momentum in computer science education, specifically at the K-12 level. So with this increase in opportunities in computer science in schools, I think it's possible that there's just a lot more momentum and a lot more awareness, which is really important, so that more girls are taking and learning computer science.
Talking more broadly, what are the societal factors that influence whether a woman pursues STEM or computer science?
That's a great question. So looking at our research study that we released in 2014, Women Who Choose Computer Science, What Really Matters, we have 4 major factors that we've identified in whether girls want to pursue computer science or not. And this study found 4 factors accounted for about 95% of the girls wanting to study computer science. And these were encouragement, career perceptions, academic exposure, and self-perception. So encouragement includes encouragement from parents, educators, other family members like siblings, friends, and even the media. And career perceptions are, what are the girls' perceptions of the field itself, and what are the career possibilities with computer science too. And then academic exposure is just being exposed to computer science and participating in computer science. And we looked at both in school and out of school, and both of those were highly influenceable for girls. And then self-perception, so just girls' own perceptions of themselves as someone who tinkers with things, who likes to problem solve, who's interested in math. Those were all influenceable for girls.
The reason that we're having this conversation is because of a paper that you wrote with several of your colleagues at Google. The paper is called Gender Differences in Factors Influencing Pursuit of Computer Science and Related Fields. And that's some of the information that you're citing.
Right.
Why did you write this paper?
So our own personal motives at Google is our emphasis on diversity. So we as a company want to diversify our workforce. We know that the tech field as a whole is not very diverse, so we want to do things to try to diversify. And one of those things includes going earlier in the pipeline at the K-12 level. We want to expand access for groups who are traditionally underrepresented to ensure that later on they have the opportunities to work at companies like Google. And so we have at Google several initiatives in computer science education. We also support several or many initiatives around the world in computer science education as well. So part of the motivation in that is that we wanted to have data and research as a foundation to inform this outreach. And we wanted this outreach as well, the whole computer science education field, to also drive the specific research that we were working on to understand where the needs and gaps were. So really, we want to be sure that we're strategic and thoughtful in approaching these issues so that we can further the entire field of computer science education.
That's great. And the paper focuses on a survey of 1,739 high school students and college graduates. Give me a finer sense of the demographics of these students that you were surveying.
Yeah, so these students were actually surveyed across the U.S. and they're nationally representative. So the high school population was roughly half of them, about 800 or so, and these were high school juniors and seniors. And then the other half were recent college graduates who had graduated in the last few years. And we also oversampled for females in this population, so about 1,000 of the 1,739 students were females. And then of both the high school and college graduate populations, about half of the high schoolers were interested in studying computer science, and about half of the college graduates had majored in computer science.
Give me a finer sense of the questions that you asked. What did you ask in that survey?
So this survey was actually building on, the decades of existing research that already looked at factors that were influencing girls. This is not a new topic, and we really wanted to build on all of these studies too. So we actually did a full literature review to identify the factors that have been studied that have been found to possibly influence pursuit of computer science. So through that literature, we identified 91 variables that we then used to ask questions on the survey. So the survey questions asked things like exposure to technology, participation in computer science activities like classes or after-school programs, whether the parents had a technology background, as well as, whether they thought computer science was fun and interesting, or if it was something that, their friends were doing. So we asked a variety of questions covering all those variables.
So the 91 different variables that you looked at from the preceding literature that you studied, these were the independent variables of the study.
Yes.
What was the dependent variable that you were trying to focus on?
The dependent variable for the high school population was whether they were interested in studying computer science and related fields.
Yes or no?
Yes or no. Yes, exactly, binary. And then for the recent college graduates, the outcome variable was whether they majored in computer science or not.
So based on your research, why are women pursuing computer science with less frequency than men? Given how those 91 different independent variables correlated with that dependent variable?
Yeah, that's not a simple question because there are just so many factors that are related to each other. It's a very complex thing. I can talk about kind of at a high level the 4 different factors that we kind of bucketed the variables, the influenceable variables in. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so for as I mentioned, there were the four variables: encouragement, career perceptions, academic exposure, and self-perception. So for the encouragement piece, this was a huge influencing variable, particularly for girls. And interestingly, we saw that of the students who were encouraged to study computer science, of the students who were interested in studying computer science, girls were much more likely to have been encouraged by both family and non-family than boys were. But then when we're looking at the students who were not interested in studying computer science, girls were even less likely than boys to have been encouraged to study computer science. And we found that overall, encouragement contributed to about 28% of a girl's decision to want to study computer science. So this was huge and hugely influential. And then in terms of the career perceptions piece, girls tended to have kind of a stronger or more extreme, either positive or negative perception of computer science. And we found that, oftentimes these perceptions are incomplete, and therefore, especially for girls, they're really highly influenceable. So for instance, of the girls who had majored in computer science for the college graduate population, they were much more likely to agree that they had a role model who gave them a positive impression of computer science. But then girls who did not major in computer science were way more likely than boys to disagree that they were given a positive impression of computer science. So these kind of social perceptions there are really, really strong for girls.
So the way that these social factors manifest, or you define them in terms of encouragement and exposure. So you kind of touched on the term encouragement. You kind of touched on exposure. Put a finer point on this, because this is really the embodiment. This is the takeaway of the study, that encouragement and exposure are these two highly important things.
Yep.
So explain these two terms.
Yeah. So encouragement comes from individuals around the student as well as the media. So individuals around the student are like parents, teachers, peers, other family members like siblings, mentors. They all have a social role to play for the girls' interest in computer science. And in terms of their influence, they can just encourage girls to even participate and be exposed to computer science. And they can also help provide kind of a broader, more diverse perception of computer science in terms of what types of careers can be pursued within that. As I alluded to earlier, our other study with Gallup really looked at how people perceived computer science, whether they thought it was something positive or whether they thought they were someone who is likely to do computer science, for instance. So all those things are really important for girls. And in terms of exposure too, just participating in computer science itself is really a huge factor for girls. But what we actually saw is that of the population that did not major in computer science for the college graduates, women were less likely to recall computer science opportunities at the pre-college level. So this included things like computer science classes, extracurricular computer science classes or clubs, and computer science camps. So that in itself is saying that, girls are actually just less aware of these opportunities than boys are. So having that exposure is really important to help broaden and diversify their image of what computer science is.
Okay, so let's talk about these two things in more detail individually. So let's talk about encouragement first. So women often do not receive encouragement to go into computer science. Is the lack of encouragement, is that the same thing as discouragement?
No, it's not. We actually did have some questions looking at discouragement, and overall, very few of girls and boys were discouraged to study computer science.
They just didn't know about it.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are the different types of groups that a young person might engage with that would shape whether that person chooses to go into computer science or understands computer science? Like who I mean, maybe this is like touching more on exposure, but who are the role models or the people that are encouraging a young person to go into computer science?
It could be anybody. We found that for girls, both encouragement from family and non-family members were really important. So for girls, encouragement from family accounted for 11% of their decision to want to study computer science, and non-family included things like teachers, role models, peers, and the media. And then encouragement from family was important and influenceable for both boys and girls. And something important is that we found is that the encouragement is important regardless of the technical background of the parent. So the parent itself, or him or herself, doesn't need to have a computer science or technical background. They just need to encourage the girl to do computer science and try it out.
I found the emphasis on the importance of family dynamics in your paper to be very fascinating, very insightful. For example, families will purchase games like Legos or will purchase Minecraft for boys, but maybe not for girls, because these parents of boys, they overestimate their child's average scientific interest relative to a girl. So this is kind of, it's very subtle, it's very interesting, but it's so important because as a child, you spend so much time with your toys and the inputs that your family gives you, and you basically have no control over that. You're just a child. What are the other ways that family dynamics affect whether a person chooses or pursues computer science, particularly relating to the different genders?
Yeah, I mean, I think the siblings can make a difference too. I think it was for the girls, the college graduates, if their sibling had encouraged them to study computer science, they were actually more likely to have studied computer science. So I think as a parent too, especially if you have both boys and girls or just, only girls, make sure that you're treating girls as individuals and not necessarily girls, as opposed to boys, right? Like you shouldn't be treating boys or girls any differently. You should be providing them with the same exposure and the same opportunities.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about exposure now and disintermediate that from encouragement. So in your study, you found that academic exposure to computer science plays a very large role in whether a girl will pursue a computer science degree. So is this academic exposure correlation, do you think this is like the average girl sort of falls through the cracks in terms of getting exposure from the family, so the academic exposure is the net that plays the most important role, basically by virtue of the fact that the encouragement doesn't happen at the family level?
Yeah, so actually the academic exposure is a little bit broader than that we looked at. It was exposure both in school and out of school. So I guess in that way, academic exposure could be a net to capture them, but there are, as you mentioned before, just so many social factors that play into that too. Like girls were much more influenced by whether their friends were in that class, for instance, or if the social crowd was, some group that they identified with. Those kinds of things also play a role for girls. So it's important not just to, understand that family dynamics can make a difference, but also the educational dynamic can make a difference too. There have been other studies looking at how gendered certain classrooms or learning environments are. And so just making sure that the learning environment that you provide to the students in computer science context is not gendered. It's not more masculine, for instance, but that it's just more neutral and more diverse in the environment.
Software engineers are always looking to automate their work. Software automation lets us get more done with the same number of resources. Investment automation works the same way. Wealthfront is an automated investment service that relies solely on software to acquire and manage client accounts. Traditional investment services have many humans in the loop, advising clients and taking fees. The problem with these older advisory services is that the advice that these services are applying is often so systematic that a computer could give the same answer, or an even better answer. Wealthfront takes a new approach with software-driven automated investment that provides better returns through software engineering. Go to wealthfront.com/SE daily to get a special offer for our listeners. $15,000 managed for free when you open your account. Don't pay commissions and account fees. Maximize your gains with Wealthfront's set it and forget it investment automation. Check out wealthfront.com/SE daily. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and it would also introduce you to the world of automated investment, so you can see if you like it or not. Wealthfront.com/SE daily. Thanks to Wealthfront for sponsoring the show. You've been a loyal sponsor, and we really appreciate it. Now let's get on with the show. One key takeaway from your study is that the specific type of participation that a girl is exposed to is not as relevant as the fact that she is simply exposed in some way. What are some of the ways that I know that the paper wasn't touching on the potential improvements as much as the actual data, but what were from judging the data, what were the weak points in the system? What are some of the ways that we can increase exposure to young girls so that they have more desire to go after computer science?
Yeah, so for this question, actually, I can pull a little bit more from our comprehensive study with Gallup, because for that one, we surveyed not only students, but we surveyed parents, teachers, principals, and superintendents to try to actually get exactly at what you're asking of like where the opportunities are, where are they lacking. And for that study, we had found that only about a quarter of principals said that their schools even offered computer science with programming and coding in it. So just that in itself shows that there aren't very many opportunities to learn computer science in schools. And then we saw that, I think it was about half of students and educators reported that there were after-school opportunities for learning computer science, but that in itself, too, may be self-selecting, right? So then girls who have this perception that computer science is not something for them or something that they're interested in won't select and elect to be in those after-school programs.
In your paper, you wrote that women have a higher tendency to focus on career paths that have social impact. And these types of women who feel very strongly about social impact, what is their impression of computer science? Do they I guess they typically don't know about computer science, or they don't think about computer science, but I don't know. What is there any correlation between the desire for social impact and a certain impression of computer science?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's mostly just a really incomplete perception of what computer science is and kind of what the stereotypes persist about computer science. And in general, the stereotypes are that it's someone who's nerdy or just really smart and someone who's alone in front of a computer, right? And so that takes away a lot of the social aspect of what computer science really involves. And, a lot of people just don't know that. And actually, the social impact piece that we found, it was actually a stronger factor for boys than for girls. So for boys who were interested in having a career with social impact, they were even less likely to want to study computer science.
That's bizarre. Because basically, like, the inverse is true. I mean, if you want to have social impact, if you want scalable impact, there's not a much better maybe philosophy or something, but or rhetoric.
Right. So it's important to show kids that you can use computer science as this tool to have social impact.
It's such a bizarre that males would see that as, it would have a negative correlation. Was there anything else sort of shocking or really counterintuitive that you saw out of this set of survey data?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I think I already mentioned this too, but I think it's just so shocking to see that of those who were not interested in computer science or who didn't express an interest in computer science, boys were still more likely to be encouraged to study computer science than girls were. So it goes back again to this perception of like this societal or cultural impression, I think, that just computer science is for boys. And we need to change that. And I think it's so important to get rid of that perception.
Your study found that most of the decision making about whether to pursue computer science actually occurs before a woman enters college.
Yeah.
Explain why the field of study that a woman pursues becomes less malleable after she begins college.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of the early exposure is just growing up as a child, all these one-time things that can make you just make almost a random decision, right? Like for me, my own career path really was a bunch of random decisions that led me to where I am today. And I think just, before you get to college, it's important to provide that first and complete perception of what computer science is, because once you enter, then there are all these other factors that come into play, that may discourage you even more from pursuing computer science. Like, as I mentioned before, weeder courses in computer science, or just the environment of there are just more men than women in computer science courses. Those kinds of things can be discouraging. But there is one thing that we did find that is positive for women who are pursuing computer science, is we found that scholarships are actually an influencing factor for girls to major in computer science.
So scholarships, there were also other positive outcomes from the study. For example, for high school girls, factors like household income and ethnicity, these actually contribute to only 4.9% of the factors that could lead to a girl not pursuing computer science. So you call these factors like household income, you call these uncontrollable factors. Mm-hmm. So explain why this is surprising. Like maybe the listeners didn't quite understand that, but like why was that outcome surprising?
Yeah, we call them uncontrollable factors because you can't control your ethnicity, you can't control your household income, right? And that's surprising because we do see this lack of diversity in the field, and that lack of diversity is often along the lines of ethnicity and household income. And so it's important to show that these things in themselves actually don't play much of a role in the ultimate outcome of whether someone decides to study computer science or not. Over 95% of the factors are things that are malleable, are things that you can contribute to and you can make a difference in because they're related to social pieces or, the environment around you.
Right, I see. So you also found, let's see, actually, I should rephrase this. So throughout this study, you found several factors that lead to fewer women in computer science. I'd like to have a conversation about how we can translate those findings into actions that will improve the situation. What are the things that we can do to improve the situation of the lack of women in computer science?
Yeah, with those 4 big factors that contribute to 95% of a girl's decision to study computer science, we have very actionable recommendations coming out of those. So encouragement, for instance, anyone can encourage a girl to study computer science, to just try it out. Anyone can help find opportunities because this really makes a huge difference. And in terms of career perceptions, just help portray a positive perception of computer science careers, help show how you can use computer science to make a social impact, help show diverse role models and examples of computer science and its applicability to a variety of fields. And then in terms of exposure, again, that these are all related, right? Like encouraging girls to do computer science then exposes them to computer science and gets them more familiar with the subject. And so with that, they can then establish a sense of competency in doing computer science and maybe shatter some of those prior stereotypes about what computer science even involves. And with that, then they can have insight into, the types of career paths that they can have. And then the self-perception piece, for that, really, it's helping girls build confidence in doing computer science, providing them with safe environments. Parents, educators, and mentors can all do this and encourage and support girls and help reinforce their perceptions positive perceptions of computer science and their own self-perceptions in computer science, and just, making sure you're not being biased with the way that you talk about computer science.
So what has been the reaction to this paper, both internally at Google and in the broader public?
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of interest. I'd say internally for us, we're really using it to help drive and shape our outreach initiatives. So it's been well received in that sense. And externally too, we get a lot of people who are saying, this is really great, really interesting. This was a US specific study too, so a lot of people are interested in replicating in other countries around the world to see how these types of social factors can play out in different cultures too. But a lot of people really are building on this and taking away, that parents play an important role. It doesn't matter what your background is, for instance. And other organizations really are working to diversify the stereotypes of computer science.
What's your sense of how this study will, if the study were replicated in other cultures, obviously US specific, how would it compare in other cultures?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's a big difference between kind of Western cultures and non-Western cultures. So we actually found, I think, or have seen, not in our own research, but kind of more anecdotal data and other articles that, for instance, a lot of like Muslim or Middle Eastern countries, there's less of a perception of like software engineering or computer science is for men. There are actually some countries where there are more women in computer science than there are men. So it'd be really interesting to see how this plays out in the other cultures.
That is so fascinating, especially because I feel like, not to delve too much into, politics but I feel like, there is more of a sense, or at least from the perception of the United States, that maybe, these Middle East countries or certain places in India, the gender gap is more significant. Like I think about places where, there are restrictions on women driving, for example. Yeah. And what you're saying is basically that like in these same places, there's a higher average percentage of women who are computer scientists, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I think there also have been studies that have looked at, more gender parity countries, like Sweden or some of the other Scandinavian countries, where they found that gender gaps in certain fields, not just computer science, are even greater. And I know that there have been studies that have kind of been looking at this culture, and it's this culture of Sepna Cherian at the University of Washington has done some really interesting studies on this too and done a literature review. And I think it's this culture of choice in the Western countries that really, perpetuate this gap, right? Because then there are these like media and social, there's like a social stigma of gender attached to certain careers. And because kids are, encouraged to choose what they want to study, then they're more likely to align with those like cultured stereotypes.
So you are doing computer science education outreach at Google. Can you talk more about this role at the company and why Google is so interested in CS outreach?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, diversity is huge at Google. We really emphasize diversity. And, one of the pieces is expanding the pool of technologists at Google. And so, we are a company mostly of engineers, and computer science is really what drives what Google is today. So we really want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to learn computer science and learn the tools of computer science. So that's really kind of our big overarching goals of why Google is interested in this. And we have several initiatives within Google that support computer science, both from, like teacher training perspective and formal outreach support. We support other organizations. We also work with the media. So we work with Hollywood studios, writers, and advocacy groups to try to challenge a lot of these stereotypes that we've been talking about and to really diversify portrayals of computer science in the media. So there are a lot of programs. Our website, g.co/csedu, has all the variety of initiatives that we have going on there.
How does research at Google compare to academic research or research at other independent institutions?
That's a great question. So I come from an academic background, and I think the biggest difference I found is with the resources. So I think what's great about Google is we emphasize scale, right? And we have resources to scale. So one of the huge exciting things is that we can do these large-scale comprehensive studies and provide this data to the world of computer science education so that other people can use it and build on it too. So I think that's one of the key differences is, we have the ability to do things at such large scale.
So what are you working on now that this gender differences study has concluded? What are you moving on to working on?
So I'd mentioned before, we've been working on a multi-year study with Gallup where we've surveyed students, parents, teachers, principals, and superintendents across the U.S. Almost 16,000 of them we surveyed at the end of 2014. And then this last year, we also surveyed another set of about 16,000 across the U.S. And so for this study, what we really wanted to know is that, what are the opportunities? What do they even look like for kids in the U.S.? Where are they learning it? Who's learning it? And then what are their perceptions of it? Like, do they actually think that computer science is something interesting? Do they think that it's something that's appealing to them? Do they think that it's useful? And this is among all the populations, right? I mentioned we had both students, parents, and educators in this study. And then on the educator side too, we wanted to know, what schools were offering it. For schools who weren't offering it, what were some of the barriers to offering it?
What are your early impressions from that study?
A lot of exciting things. So I was actually super surprised to find out that overall, across all the populations, particularly students and parents, people had really positive perceptions of computer science. So, for instance, they said things like people who do computer science work on fun and interesting projects. They do things that help improve people's lives. And that was surprising to me, given our previous study here, where we found that girls and boys who were interested in social impact were less likely to want to study computer science. But then, to the contrast to that is that they have all these positive perceptions of computer science, but they have very narrow perceptions of who's doing computer science. In general, they say male, white, someone who's smart does computer science. So they think computer science is interesting and relevant, but it's not for them. And so that was one of the huge things that we found there.
Fascinating. So let's zoom out, begin to close off. What is your impression for how the tide is changing, or is the tide changing? Obviously you have a very data-driven approach to the work that you do, and I'm kind of asking you to step outside of the data or extrapolate from that data and give me your own intuitive impression for how things are changing. What's your impression of like the industry as a whole, and I guess the entirety of the pipeline?
Yeah, I think computer science is just becoming much more known across groups. People are realizing that it's something that it's important and that it's something that kids should learn. With President Obama even announcing the Computer Science for All initiative, it's being recognized at the federal level too, right? And then there have been, several cities and districts across the U.S. who are announcing that they're going to start offering computer science in every school. And so really there's a huge wave and a huge momentum to start getting computer science into schools and start exposing kids to computer science early on. The challenge with that is really making sure that what they're offering is quality computer science and making sure that it's equitable too, that it doesn't perpetuate the stereotype that computer science is for white boys, we need to make sure that it's relevant and appealing for all kids, no matter what their background, no matter what their interests are.
Well, Jennifer, that sounds like a great place to close off. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I enjoyed reading your paper a lot, and I look forward to reading the next one as soon as it's published.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.